Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Hello, Larry. Thank you for having us today on this exciting workshop. So, few people are joining right now. As everyone's coming in, I definitely encourage people to enter questions in the chat feature. There's a Q&A button on the bottom of the Zoom. We want this workshop to be as engaging as possible. So, please, if you guys have questions when we have this workshop, put your questions on the chat. Larry, thank you so much again for hosting us. I know we're specializing this workshop for Canadians who want to explore permanent residency in the US. I can tell you it's very interesting times. I think Canada, Larry, has been one of the most active markets for EB-5, and there's a lot of unique market dynamics that we're going to talk about that. But just, I know a lot of people know who you are here. If Larry, could you give us a little introduction about your practice and background and what you do? So for those who aren't familiar, they can get to know you better.
Well, thank you, Matt, for the opportunity. It's a delight to be on this webinar with you and to the people who are listening in. Just to kind of give folks a little bit of background, I grew up in Montreal, Canada, up until 1976. I lived there. I went to McGill University for undergraduate, University of Montreal for my civil law degree. And then with the classic Canadian objections, which is basically weather, taxes, and issues that really affect your livelihood, I decided to come to Florida. So I was actually the first student to be admitted to Nova Southeastern University to get my JD degree and locally. So we've had a practice in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, downtown Fort Lauderdale, since 1979. And we are a little bit of a boutique law firm that we are only 5 people in the firm, but we work very, very closely with the clients because they're all basically investment clients. So we make sure that the whole process is handled from beginning to end, soup to nuts. And so it's a delight to do that. We've handled numerous EB-5 cases, and the platform for Canadians is essentially the same as others, with the caveat that the final process takes place at the U.S. Consulate in Montreal.
Thank you, Larry. I'll give a quick introduction of myself. I'm Matthew Khalili. For those of you that aren't familiar, what I am is an investment banker, and I help do due diligence, project selection, advisory, and structuring for the business side of immigration. A lot of investors typically use me to represent them in helping them select investment solutions. I've been involved in investment immigration for nearly 15 years and basically been involved either directly or tangentially in around $1 billion dollars in capital formation. So I've helped hundreds of families over the years. Pretty well known as a business planner. So anyone that needs different business visas, they hire me. But my primary focus and capacity is basically helping EB-5 investors in project selection. MBA from USC, and been doing this most of my professional career. So the purpose today is to really educate Canadians to understand exactly what the framework looks like for EB-5 and how to be able to capture this unique opportunity for permanent residency. The first 20 minutes, we'll have a short presentation, and we really want to hear about Larry and his perspectives on how the EB-5 visa program works. And again, if anyone has questions, please enter in the Q&A. We see a bunch already right now, so I'll do my best as this presentation comes to make sure those questions are addressed. So without further ado, I'm going to share my slides. And we're here to talk about EB-5 for Canadians and to really just help with this, help the snowbirds obtain permanent residency. So I'll tell you what we're hearing these days about a lot of the incentives for Canadians specifically. So there's a lot of reasons why Canadians like to come to the US. First thing is, we see that Canadians are coming to the US and they're starting businesses here. And if your primary income is in the US, there's a pretty nice tax advantage to just operating here. You know, many Canadians like to go to Florida, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, warm weathers, states, and you know, at the end of the day, there's a huge tax advantage compared to just being in Canada, right? So Canada has a marginal rate that's 53% over. There's no state income tax. The US tax system is very complex, like, you know, just like Canada, but there's just a clear advantage just in that, right? Especially starting a business. Larry, I know you're probably involved with a lot of TN visas, but maybe you can just talk about kind of, you know, yes, a lot of people come on TN, but what are maybe some of the advantages of just being a permanent resident or having a TN visa?
So the TN visa is basically a trade NAFTA visa. There's a Schedule A that lists all the different professions that are available to be able to qualify, to be able to work in the United States for 3 years at a time. It's renewable. However, the TN visa is only a band-aid to be able to be here in the US. Does not give the spouse any benefits to be able to work here in the US, but does allow a lot of cross-border going in and out and travel. So for short-term people who are economists or engineers or management consultants, it's a very valuable tool to be able to have to work in the U.S. The unemployment rate in Florida today is 4.8%. So basically, any American who wants a job can get a job. There's lots of opportunities in the U.S. And primarily, why people come to the United States is for their children. Their motivation is not for their own situation, but really to give their children an opportunity to come. There's also the E2 investor visa, where the clients invest $100,000 or more in a commercial enterprise. It's very appealing because it's a 5-year visa, renewable indefinitely, and does not require U.S. employment of third parties. So the crowning visa is really the EB-5, which gives them the opportunity to be able to be in the United States on a permanent basis. And the EB-5 does require an investment of $800,000 in a regional center, in a targeted employment area, or $1,050,000 in all other areas of the United States. So the EB-5 is a green card process, initially a conditional green card process, which converts into a permanent green card with the expectation of the return of the capital normally within a 5-year period. So again, why it's valuable is for the children. The children would be able to get, as long as the application is made when they're under 21, the application is really made for the benefit of the children and will allow the family to be able to immigrate to the United States. The process can take anywhere from 2 to 3 years to finalize, and there are some peripheral costs that are associated with it, but nothing major.
Thank you. And Larry, just to jump in on what you're saying, so I can't stress how much this education is just a powerful tool for Canadians. But we did the math, and if you send your kid to a public school and they're an in-state resident, you know, they're generally saving somewhere around $30,000 per child. So not only do you get access to the school, right, just by being a permanent resident, you can save about $120,000 per child. And imagine you have multiple children, right, involved in that system. So I agree. Like I'm seeing the same thing on my side. And yeah, and just like you were saying, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but like the US market, like I love how you quoted that. You really quoted the employment rate. It's substantially, you know, much lower than most other countries. But what I'm also seeing is, you know, 50% of the world's venture capital is in the US, and we have the highest like small business ownership rate, the highest home ownership rate. And at the same time, right, you compound that with kind of the tax advantages and just the quality of living in the US that really drives a lot of interest. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I know you were talking about some of the pathways, but just from my experience, I've been seeing more Canadians these last few years trying to get permanent residency than ever in my life.
Well, Matthew, you have to live through a Canadian winter to really appreciate living in the United States. It's the winters are long, dark, cold, and gloomy, along with the politics and the economy. The American dollar has strengthened in the last year. The economy has done much, much better than before. And we're on a good path here in the US. 95% of our clients who come to the United States on a temporary visa, whether it's an E2 or a TN visa, stay in the United States. They do not go back to Canada. There are family considerations, in that process for elderly parents or children or whatever. But for the most part, they stay and thrive in the United States.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm saying the same thing. So I'm just going to share with everyone what is the EB-5 program. And Larry, I'd love to get kind of your perspectives on the legal process. But just so everyone knows, Larry touched upon EB-5 being an investment program. Um, I just want everyone to know it's not a new program. It's been around for 35 years. I'd say recently it's gone through some really incredible reform in 2022 that strengthened protections for investors. So it's been around a long time. I'd say it was more well known in the last 10 years, but after 2022, it's become fairly established. The math that we've seen is if we had to approximate about $50 billion of capital has been deployed. I have on this side that it's 40 billion, but it's actually closer to 50 billion if we had to do some estimates. And there have been at least 200,000 visas that have been approved since its history. And believe it or not, it has a pretty good approval rate. So at least 90% of people who applied have been getting approved for their green cards. And it's accelerating. It's becoming really popular. So, I know 40 billion has been deployed, I'd say up till 2025. Since RIA, there's been an acceleration. We've accounted for $6 billion, which proportionally over the last 35 years, it's becoming pretty popular. Now, we'll talk about what EB-5 is, but there's something known as a regional center, which are the licensed entities able to do to sponsor projects for EB-5 that we're going to get into. But there's about 500 active regional centers right now that allow people to conduct EB-5 investments. So that's just kind of the history and impact on it on a high level. Um, Larry, can you tell us some of the advantages? I know you touched on, the TN and you touched on the E2, but can you tell us like some of the other advantages about like who it occurs, being able to apply from the US, maybe talk about kind of the wait times with other green card options and everything else you're seeing with EB-5?
Well, the good news for Canadians is that there is no quota for Canadians to be able to come to the United States. The application runs on two tracks. One track is a selection of the project, and the other track is a source of funds. So when somebody prepares an EB-5 application, they generally run on both tracks at the same time, simultaneously to be able to prepare a complete package. Now, there are some people who are in a big hurry and who want to be here in the United States. So the legislation changed in 2023 to allow people to come to the United States and actually file for their EB-5 application from the United States as tourists. As you may know, Matt, Canadians are allowed 6 months per year as tourists to the United States, fairly automatically, but many people want to choose to complete their process here in the United States. The other alternative is to be able to finalize the case through the USCIS, which reviews the case. Then it goes to the National Visa Center, and then it goes to the Consulate in Montreal. So those are the three main steps that need to be done. And there is a technical deadline that's coming up in September to be able to finalize the EB-5 application, which is why a lot of people are filing before that deadline at this time.
Thank you, Larry. And I know you touched on the process, right? And there's certain projects that we're going to talk about that have something known as priority processing. But Larry, can you maybe walk us through kind of the steps and timelines, right? Because when you apply in the US, you can get work authorization, if I'm not mistaken. So can you tell us exactly what that process looks like and timelines in your experience?
Yeah, so your chart is excellent, Matt, that you presented here. So the first and most important step is the selection of a project. So our law firm does not do the selection of the project with the client. We refer to specialists like yourself who do a due diligence, and you have generally about 40 factors that you take into consideration before making a selection of a project for a client. And this helps a great deal because they're all based on econometric models to ensure that the client is well positioned within the project and has a fair expectation of the return of the capital when their cycle is over, which is normally about 5 years. So the selection of the project is very, very important per se. The funding of the project is very important as well because the money that's used in the project can be either obtained through a gift, a loan, or personal savings. This is important so that the applicant can be able to go ahead and make that application. And it could be either spouse, and it would include all minor children of the family. Now, if the applicants are in the United States and they wait the requisite period of time, within 9 months, they would be able to get an employment authorization document and an advance parole to be able to travel. I don't really like that as an option for Canadians because it restricts their travel for about 9 months. What I like to do is I like to file the case here in the United States with an eventual processing through the consulate in Montreal to be able to allow them to go in and out of the United States at will. And then at that point, they would receive their green cards, which is about 2 years later. The initial step is in the application, which is called an I-526E, is the obtaining the conditional green card. The conditional green card means that you become a resident of the United States for a 2 year period of time, at which time you submit further documentation to demonstrate that the project has been executed and completed, that the jobs have been created with the project. The whole EB-5 structure is based on capital infusion and job creation. Those are the two main motivators for legislators in Washington to have created the project to begin with. So job creation, capital infusion are very, very important. Now, in terms of the capital, the law currently requires a 7 year look back. So that means that the government is allowed to look at your finances going back 7 years from the time that you file. And that's very important because if there are gaps in tax returns in Canada or any other issues, it becomes a problem. What's important also is to ensure that you engage with a Canadian CPA who is going to be able to advise you of the financial structure of your family, as well as any potential departure tax that you may have from Canada with Revenue Canada. So these are important things, but you have 2 years to be able to resolve that. The funds that are available, usually for Canadians, they usually raise the money through either refinancing their home, selling some kind of an asset, getting a loan from a bank or from a financial institution, and then being able to use that capital. It's a fairly fluid scenario. We work a lot with CIBC. We work a lot with Desjardins Bank, National Bank of Canada, Trust TD Bank. I mean, a lot of the banks are very, very knowledgeable about the EB-5 program. I've been involved in the EB-5 program since 1989. And at that time, I used to knock on doors of legislators in Washington and they didn't know what it was. Today, everybody wants to have an EB-5 project in their district. And so 8,000 cases later, I'm happy to say that it's a well-established quantity here in the United States.
Thank you, Larry. So I just want to touch on, and we have a lot of questions, so we're going to dive into it. So, but there's various categories in EB-5 right now that one can invest in. So if people, just as Larry said, You have to make an investment into generally a construction project. One can actually create their own operating business as well and hire 10 W-2 employees. But I'd say 95% of our clients typically invest as a passive investment into a real estate construction project. Depending on the location of the project, it could either be 800,000 or, like Larry said, 1,050,000. I would say I don't think I have an investor that does 1,050,000. The vast majority pick projects that allow that lower threshold of 800,000. Now, typically there's three reserved categories that will qualify for 800,000. They're generally high unemployment. There's a small category called infrastructure as well. And then there's a rural category. Now, what's important to know is high unemployment may sound like, hey, these are really rough areas, but in reality, they seem to really come up with fairly clever economic averages to make an area appear to be higher in unemployment than maybe it actually is. And just as an example, they have projects in New York City, they had a project in Beverly Hills, they have projects in prime Miami that qualify for high unemployment. Generally, when you invest in a high unemployment project, you get options for, I'd say, more prime markets. But I would say that the investment time doesn't get the same advantages as this other category is rural. Larry, would you say it takes about what 12 to 24 months to get conditional green cards from what you're seeing right now in high unemployment?
Yeah, and also I want to be clear that the high unemployment is almost a misnomer because the
Right.
calculation on the quote unquote high unemployment is 150% of the national average. So if the national average is, let's say, 4% or 4.5% unemployment, that means that the unemployment in that area would be only like 7% or 7.5%, which is not a huge number. So that's number one. Number two, the rural component is based on populations that are under 20,000. So basically, to be able to qualify the census tracts, and that's how these things are calculated. They're calculated by census tracts. So there's an economist for each regional center that calculates whether or not the project for the regional center will be either high unemployment, rural, or not. And so you could have a project on one side of the street that's high unemployment, and across the street it's not. So it's very important to know and understand the census tracts that have been used in the econometric model to come up with the SEC documentation. Every project has an issuance of Securities and Exchange Commission documentation to be able to explain every component of the project and to be able to clarify for the investor what they're getting into.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. And just kind of add on what you're saying, right? So 20,000 residents in a rural project. So first of all, there's a pretty big advantage to investing in a rural project. What they do is they allow priority processing. And as Larry said, there's no backlog for Canadians, and they get to really benefit from this feature. Generally, from after they file and invest, we're seeing people get conditional green card approval in 6 to 12 months, if I'm not mistaken, Larry. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yes, yes, generally that's about right.
Okay. And to give people a background, I know rural sounds like it's out in the middle of nowhere. The way they look at rural is residents. So tourists do not count in that model. So, we've been seeing projects in really nice areas like Aspen, Colorado, like in Deer Valley, Utah, in, really prime areas that you wouldn't imagine. But because they're not permanent residents, right? They qualify as rural. So rural and high unemployment doesn't mean better or worse necessarily. One needs to examine every project for its own merits. But USCS is rewarding investors with a faster processing time with rural. There is another category of infrastructure, and I have here on these slides these visa reservation allocations. Uh, in infrastructure projects are fairly rare, and they also qualify for 800,000. There needs to be some sort of government involvement, and they can be good projects as well. But from what I'm seeing so far, they've been having more challenging exit strategies. So something we'll talk about, later on how to do due diligence and project selection. But just real quick before we start answering questions, I'm just going to quickly talk about exactly what you can expect in a project. So I have here some pros and cons, but the first thing is a typical timeline for a construction project is going to be anywhere from, I would say, 4 or 5 to 7 years before you get repaid. Just some rule of thumbs, right? Like I mentioned that there were nearly 500 regional centers. Generally, we try to work with, I'd say the top 20 regional centers are responsible for almost 80% of investments. And the top 20 regional centers generally have an 80 to 90% success rate, right, compared to the other regional centers out there. So very important, to be able to work with regional centers that have a lot of experience operating things, right? Regional centers are sponsoring projects and they have a process and it's almost like going public. So they have to submit a lot of documentation and there's an approval process. So, we want to look at projects that we feel confident that are going to be approved or are approved already. And, there's a lot of information we can talk about on how to examine a good project, right? So we won't get into that for today's purpose, but hopefully we want you to just spark some interest so you ask questions and we can share how it works. But the fundamentals are pretty clear, right? In order for someone to get a green card, a number of things must occur. The project needs to get built, right? So jobs get created as a function of construction. Okay? Project has to be financed, right? So in order to be successful, they need to be able to raise all the money, EB-5 and non-EB-5 money, and the project needs to be able to exit, right? The project needs to have a mechanism where it's profitable and it can repay the investors. Typically, like I said, that could be a 4 to 7 year timeline. To earn your green card, by law, you must be invested for at least 2 years, right? And Larry, maybe you can touch on what the sustainment period means for everyone, because the track of earning a green card is technically a different track than repayment.
Yeah, basically, the USCIS wants to see that your funds are actually invested in the project, and that when it comes time for you to lift the condition status, that you're still vested into the project. Now, I know that a lot of people are unilingual, they speak maybe only French. That's not a problem. There are no language restrictions in terms of the EB-5 scenario. So we also speak Spanish in our office as well. So I think it's very important that the clients begin to get very organized, because U.S. immigration, there's no rocket scientry that's associated to it, but it's a question of being well organized by preparing a binder with clear documentation. And then before you even embark on an EB-5 project is to assess whether or not you have a criminal record of any kind. The criminal record, your history is very, very important and would actually be considered before even engagement into the EB-5 project. There are some criminal aspects that are maybe happened 30 years ago, which are not that critical, or if they happened last week with a DUI, that could be very critical. So it all depends on the individual. These have to be pre-cleared before even the selection of the project.
Thank you, Larry. And so just to be clear, you talked about a language proficiency requirement. So if they speak French, that can are they eligible for EB-5 or do they need some English proficiency?
So there's no language requirement for the EB-5 program. What they wanted to see is a clean source of funds of the capital that's being invested, and a clean background history.
Ah, very cool. So we have a bunch of questions, Larry, and one of the viewers have asked, what does it look like inside a consulate? Like when they go and they apply and they have to go through the consulate process. Okay, just what is that experience like?
So, especially for Canadians who are so used to crossing the border easily and without any consternation, they may or may not have ever been on the inside of a consulate or embassy before. And so I've been personally to 62 different embassies and consulates around the world. I've traveled extensively. And the good news is that they're all look alike. They all look like the inside of a Chinese takeout. And you have a counter, you have a microphone, you have a plate glass window, and you have the console on the other side of the glass. And you're standing up, and it's very, very public. So people get freaked out when they see that their case is being discussed openly with the other people in the room. Normally, that's the process that has to be taken. Now, the one in Montreal is very similar physically. It's usually set on a fixed date and a fixed time. There's a medical exam that's done ahead of time. So the medical history of the applicants should also be taken into consideration. But that's what the inside of a consulate looks like.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. And I have I have a pretty I'd say general question here. So how does typically one get organized for an EB-5 application, and how do they select a good regional center?
So the organization of any immigration file to the US is very important from the get-go. So we like to encourage our clients to acquire a binder, a three-ring binder with 50 different separation pages and numbers because they're going to need it over time. There's a construction of the file, birth certificates, marriage certificates, passports, tax returns. The list goes on and on and on. And so the table of contents grows over time. And so by having a binder and being well organized, it not only reduces the stress on you as the applicant, but also will impress the government official to know that you're ready to go and that you're not going to waste their time as well.
Thank you, Larry. And how do you pick a good regional center?
Picking a regional center is really the in the orbit of somebody as qualified like yourself, Matt, somebody who is knowledgeable about all the different regional centers. I've lost count of how many regional centers there, but I think there's about 75. Am I right?
Well, I would say there's 75 that sponsor a project, but there's 500 plus regional centers that are filed at this moment in time.
Right. So anybody who's a layperson to try to figure out which of those regional centers has the validity financially, structurally, and historically is way too big a challenge. You really need to have somebody who's knowledgeable in the industry to help you walk you through it. Also, the distinction between a rural and a high unemployment area is important, to be able to make the selection process. So I like to have our clients uh, learn about different regional centers and their projects. And I also like them to be in the middle of the investors. Like, for example, if there are 30 investors in the whole package, they would be like number 15 in the middle. And I also like them to have photographs or live camera, on the site to be able to see the development of the project. They're investors, they're partners into the deal. So they should be entitled to see what's happening out of the ground.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. And just for context, we have like at least 40 attributes we review for every project, and it gets very nuanced, right? There's a lot of pros and cons. There's generally no perfect project. There's a lot of risk, but we examine a lot of things, both the regional center, the managers, and the project itself. So, definitely, I think it's important to get professional assistance in helping someone with project selection.
Yeah, and the track record of the sponsors of the regional center is very important. You want to be associated with people who have experience not only in the business of building or constructing, but also in the industry of the EB-5 world. Normally the EB-5 component will not assume more than 50% of the capital stack of the project. So, for example, if it's a $100 million project, the EB-5 investors generally will not be beyond 40 or $50 million of the capital stack. So you have to be sure that the project has all the econometric models to be able to ensure that you will be repaid in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say generally when a project is too over leveraged with EB-5, it's sometimes a red flag. So all these are all things we should look at. Larry, someone in the audience was asking some questions on source of funds. They want to know, do you really need 7 years of tax returns? And can you give us a little bit more detail about, how source of funds works?
Yes. So there are what are called forensic accountants in the United States. Those are people who are qualified to prepare a source of funds report for USCIS. And they will go back into the history of the applicant to ensure that the funds that are being used for EB-5 purposes are clean, that they have identifiable sources per se. They also want to be sure that the individual has followed the law in their home country with regard to their tax returns and their financials. Now, if somebody is young and does not have 7 years, then that's a viable reason not to have 7 years of tax returns. But generally speaking, most people would be able to provide that. There is a lot of work that's done to be able to help the accountant prepare a clean chart, the chart that shows the flow of the funds and the path of the funds. And then the funds are actually transposed into the escrow account of the regional center before they are deployed.
Thank you, Larry. And I know you talked about the different pathways to apply for EB-5. Someone is asking basically, can you really clarify what the timeline and process is, and what's the best way for them to travel back and forth from Canada? I know you said you don't like people applying from the US, so what does that process look like from Canada? When can they start traveling?
So generally speaking, most Canadians need at least 1 to 2 years to liquidate their assets and their lives in Canada before making what's called a full immigration move to the United States. So during that period of time, the case is being reviewed by USCIS. So USCIS, as you stated, is going to take anywhere from 1 to 3 years to review the case. So during that period of time, we like to give our clients the flexibility to go in and out of the US, which they can do while their case is pending at USCIS. Once USCIS sends their approval of the application, then the case will be transferred to the National Visa Center, which happens to be located in New Hampshire. And then New Hampshire will designate the proper post in Canada for the final immigrant application, which is in Montreal.
Thank you, Larry. Now, as people are planning their move from Canada to the US, does Canada have an exit tax or departure tax or anything like that? What do you advise your clients?
Yeah, so Canada does have a departure tax and exit tax, but it's basically for people who have capital gains of assets that are still in Canada or have assets that they need to liquidate. So we work with a lot of Canadian CPA firms, and also it's important to be fully apprised of the consequences of making the move to the United States. Normally speaking, most clients are able to liquidate their assets without any major tax consequence. And they have a long period of time to be able to do that. So generally speaking, it's not an impediment overall because the gains far outweigh the cost.
Got it. And we talked about, so we had someone that's asking, what is approval? I know the term is a 956F, and what is a qualified regional center? What does even the word regional center mean?
Yeah, so a regional center is nothing more than a territory that's been designated by a group of investors who initiate projects and to be able to solicit funds from the public to be able to help them finance their projects, within the United States. Those regional centers submit plans and documentation to demonstrate the solvency of their project and the projects that they have in mind. After the USCIS has reviewed them, then they will be able to grant them approval of the territory.
Thank you, Larry.
With that, they can go ahead. I'm sorry. With that, they're going to be able to go ahead and solicit funds from the public to be able to apply for EB-5 qualification, of which there are 10,000 visa numbers available in this category annually.
Thank you, Larry. Now, we have someone that's asking if they have a criminal record, are they able to get a waiver or are they ineligible for EB-5?
Generally speaking, we like to make sure that our clients have a waiver and we make an assessment as to what that charge is or what the issue is. And very often I ask them to get a clearance from the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is the clearance center for all criminal records in Canada. Once I have the report from the RCMP, I can determine whether or not it's going to be an issue in terms of the case. So I don't want to leave it up to the end, because the vice consul that makes the decision at the consular level at the very end, I don't like to leave it to the last minute to make a decision as to whether or not they're going to qualify.
Right, understood. And so we have someone that wants to know, is the investment guaranteed, or what does the risk look like in a project?
Well, one of the main considerations of EB-5 is that the investment is never guaranteed. There's no way that a developer or sponsor would be able to guarantee the return of the funds. So there is a risk element associated with the project, which is why having somebody who's qualified to analyze it is to mitigate or to reduce the risk component. But there's no guarantee per se that can be done for a project.
Yeah, and that's really the kind of premise of EB-5. What they want to do is attract foreign investors to be able to stimulate the economy and create jobs. And there needs to be a risk market associated with that. But the advantage is in real estate, you can be a passive investor at least, and it limits the operational risk of typically starting a business. So yeah, definitely every project has its own unique risks, and it's important to know what those are. Now, kind of in that vein, Larry, can you talk about the gold card? So, Trump was saying that, hey, if you donate the money, it's a guaranteed way to come into this country. Is that a real thing? How is this different than EB-5?
So we have shall we say, an unusual president right now, and he had touted a gold card at the $5 million level, which was a contribution to the Treasury of the United States. That particular program has never been approved by Congress. I believe there's been one application in the last 3 years on this particular component. I don't know if it was approved or not, but basically speaking, it's a non-starter. There are other countries around the world which have a similar program that do work. Portugal, Spain, Greece, Cyprus. There's a lot of different countries around the world that do have a similar type of program, but not in the United States. The EB-5 program was designed specifically for job creation and capital attraction, and that's what it's done for the last 25 years. So I was actually one of the first attorneys in the country to handle EB-5 work. I've been involved in it since 1989. My first case was in 1995. I know I don't look it, but I'm pretty old. And so we have a lot of experience. We have a very seasoned team here at the office in all immigration matters.
Thank you, Larry. And to kind of touch on this gold card, because we get that question a lot as well. It is fairly controversial, right? So generally, legislators need to make new visa categories. Trump couldn't do that. So seems like he made this part of the NIW category that you could be go through the EB1A or EB2. So it's kind of a strange way that they've constructed this gold card, right? And apparently having the ability to donate $1 million qualifies as extraordinary ability according to Trump. So just to kind of think about it on a practical level, it was made by executive order, and if a new president comes in, he could probably revoke that executive order. So it's not a very stable visa. And compared to EB-5, it's a donation. And Leary, EB-5 basically sponsors an entire family with their children, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, when you say entire, it's the entire immediate family, because I have seen situations where my clients have asked whether it includes their parents or their uncles or whatever. It does not. It includes the immediate nuclear family, husband, wife, and minor children under 21.
Right. And there's a lot of nuance to it as well, right? Like it's unmarried children. And just out of curiosity, will it include like stepchildren? Does it include stepbrothers or?
Yes, and anybody who's got a relationship per se is fine. And I had a case where the family had 9 children. Now, to spend $800,000 when you're a family of 10 is a very good deal. So,
Yeah.
so, so you have to look at the family structure before you start on it. The fees that are associated from the government are minor for an extended family.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And just kind of wrap things up with the gold card. It's $1 million per family member, right? So husband, I think it's each husband, wife, children, each $1 million, if I'm not mistaken, is the proposed offering.
Yes, and to be honest with you, we that's correct, but we don't really focus on that very much because it's going after a rabbit hole. We just don't know where it's going to go, and we don't really work in that environment. We only work in an environment where we see that the success model. If I can't see the success for the family or for the law, then I'm not going to touch the case.
Thank you. Larry, someone in the audience wants to know, for source of funds, if they want to get a loan against their home, or like, and I'm just speaking outside the question, if they want to get a loan against their business or a personal loan, is that acceptable, or do they have to actually use like their personal cash?
No, a loan is entirely acceptable. And as a matter of fact, most people who own their own homes in Canada will be able to approach their bank and be able to leverage the equity in their home against an EB-5 investment placement. So the returns for an EB-5 investment are generally very small. You basically the sponsor will grant maybe 0.25 with a maximum of maybe 3% return on the capital. So it's important to balance what you're borrowing in Canada versus what you can expect from an EB-5 project. The EB-5 project is not a financially motivated project for the investor, but you can borrow it. A lot of people gift the capital. Like for example, a father will gift it to his adult son or daughter to be able to qualify for the EB-5 project. We have gift affidavits, we have acceptance affidavits that help them propel them, in that direction.
And Larry, and definitely, I would tell people definitely consult an immigration attorney on this. But if they're in the U.S. working and they've earned a 401k with a former employer, what investors are doing, you can actually use your former employer's 401k and roll it over in a self-directed account. So some people can even use retirement money for EB-5. It's something that takes careful planning. I don't want to suggest everyone do that without the proper counsel, but EB-5 seems pretty flexible with your assets, either through a secure loan or unsecured loan, and even this self-directed IRA option, which seems very interesting.
Yeah, and that's why I encourage my clients to jump on the bandwagon with the certified public accountant immediately before we even start the case because they're the ones who are going to be able to chart out what the source of the capital is and how you convey that to an officer who's reviewing the case for the first time. So you may have lived with your finances for 20 or 30 years, but the officer is looking at it for the first time. So there's got to be a lot of clarity in the submission of the application to the officer to make it quick and easy for them to make an assessment.
Thank you, Larry. So hey, we have two more questions from the audience, but one wants to know, how do those jobs get created for me? So I think a lot of people are intimidated by the idea of how to create jobs, but maybe you can kind of touch on how that works.
Basically, the responsibility of the creation of the jobs, either direct, indirect, or induced, are the platform for EB-5 job creation. That's done by the sponsor. So at the beginning of the process, the economist for the regional center or for the project will create a model to be able to demonstrate that the proposed project will generate those kind of jobs initially. And there are 10 jobs that are allocated per investor. So if you have 100 investors, you have 1,000 jobs that are going to be created. Now, you say 1,000 jobs, you're not going to have 1,000 people on the job site, but you have jobs that have been created in the community, and that counts as part of it as well. So direct, indirect, and induced are the type of jobs that are being created by the project. That's why EB-5 is popular with politicians because it does demonstrate the actual creation of jobs in the U.S.
Thanks. And does the investor have to be actively involved in the project? Do they have ownership in this project, or what does that look like?
Well, yes, I mean they have ownership by the EB-5 model. However, they're not required to shepherd the project through. They are basically passive investors in the project, but they are entitled to be able to get project status reports and to know where the project is being developed. And of course, we recommend on-site visits of the project by the investor. If the investor is going to be making an investment anywhere in the U.S., we do recommend an appointment with the sponsor to be able to see how the project is rolling out and how it's progressing.
Thank you, Larry. So these were all the questions we have. If anyone's interested in learning more about EB-5, do you provide free consultations?
On the initial EB-5 investor, we do provide a courtesy consultation, which normally will last about an hour because we want to be sure that not only that they select us, but that we select them. It's a two-way street. It's a relationship. We have to be sure that the applicant, the investor, is qualified before we would undertake them as a client.
And how do people get in touch with you?
They can get in touch with me either by email. And the email is Larry at eb5lawyers.com or Larry at e2lawyer.com.
Thank you. And just to kind of conclude, we have some deadlines with EB-5. What timelines should we be cognizant of?
Well, the deadlines are always changing and for different purposes, but for the current deadline to maintain the status currently, it's September of 2026. And then on cases that have been filed by then, it'll be September 2027 before it goes up for reauthorization by Congress in the United States. We are very optimistic in the EB-5 community that it will be reauthorized. We're very positive about it. The results have been very substantial. There's no platform in the U.S. economy that's given more motivation to keep it going than the EB-5 scenario.
Thank you. So are you advising people to file before September 30th, 2026?
Yes, I'm encouraging them very highly to file before that date. And obviously, with such a short window of time, it has to be coordinated very quickly and very smoothly.
Thank you. And just the kind of last thing, I know there's another timeline that's important. January 1st, the investment is going to go up as well. So for anyone who's interested in filing, September 30th is a good timeline. So thank you for everyone who's joined us. Larry, thank you so much for the generous information you provided. Anyone's interested in learning more about the EB-5 program, I encourage everyone to seek their immigration counsel, talk to Larry, 1 hour free courtesy consultation to see if you're qualified. And I look forward to perhaps meeting some of you in the future.
Thank you, Matt.
Take care, Larry. Bye.